Hello everyone! In today's video, we'll be VOD reviewing the quarterfinals of the NTU Debate Championship 2019. In particular, we'll be taking a look at Enting Lee's PM speech for a motion that I would consider to be very principle-heavy, only to the extent that it's connected to a meaningful pragmatic outcome. So let's dive immediately right into it. The motion for this round is as follows. This House believes that former colonial powers should aggressively favor their former colonies in trade, e.g. preferential trade terms, prioritization of trade deals, etc. What is hopefully interesting about this topic, and I would think is a reasonable difficulty when it comes to a lot of model debates like this, is that you do not necessarily immediately know the comparative that opposition would defend, and as a consequence, you may not know what principle they would adopt. So a lot of times, PM speakers might end up being very hesitant about running any principle at all, since they just think that opposition might agree with everything about it, so why run a principle? So my instruction for this video is to observe how Enting approaches this dilemma when it comes to running the argument on reparations, which is that former colonies deserve reparations for the direct injustices that were committed by their respective colonial powers throughout colonial history. More than this, notice how she connects this argument with the specific policy of developing preferential trade agreements, thus making a very cohesive principle in speech. Alright, so at this point, please pause the video, watch the speech, and then go back here once you are done. So after a very comprehensive set of definitions on what this debate is about, I think the most crucial clarification that Enting launches in this speech is the following. Here is what opposition then has to defend. Opposition defends existing trade deals, or they defend trade deals struck with other kinds of countries. I think the most likely alternative that they would have to defend is these countries trading with existing regional blocs or with China. This is an important clarification that sets the stage for a mutually exclusive principle, that this debate is about trade with former colonies to the exclusion of other existing regional blocs or other trade relationships that exclude these former colonies. And this is even enhanced by the answer to the POI, which is also asked within the speech, which asks about other countries that would be excluded from these trade agreements. Enting's answer goes on to say that while colonial oppression may have had larger expansive effects beyond specific colonies, direct trade with former colonies is important for direct reparations. Note that without this framing, a principle of reparations in general would not be as effective, because as we will see later, it is necessary to maximize your principle's worth by directly tying it to the nature of the model that you are supporting, which in this case is the preferential trading arrangement with former colonies. So that's the first step, right? It's very important to be able to tie it to the model by clarifying what the comparative is so that you could eventually develop the principle in a mutually exclusive way. So let's continue. Enting then goes on to argue the following. Colonization massively privileged a handful of countries at the expense of everyone else. Formerly colonized countries were stripped of natural resources. Labor was stolen in the form of slavery. Citizens of former colonized countries were denied education and wages and were forced to work in harmful labor conditions that benefited former colonial masters at the expense of developing their own industries. This had long-term impacts on their health, which prevented them from providing for their family. More insidiously, this included the destruction of existing industries and markets that prevented the economic development of the country, keeping them subservient to the global economic order that we see today. Now, there's a lot going on in this setup, but what is basically happening is that in order to eventually argue, again, the principle of reparations, the necessity for direct reparations through trade, what we are demonstrating now is that A, there was direct injustice in the form of economic thievery, and B, that economic disadvantage today is a direct consequence of colonialism. And it's these 2 points of context, that make it all the much easier to explain that reparation can only uniquely and justly be done through a preferential trade agreement that will restore these injustices and reparate through the economic gains that are made through this particular form of trade. And as the speech goes on to say afterward, this is why a cash transfer or any other alternative form of reparation, assuming that opposition may adopt that same principle, is insufficient and is also not as direct. Now, Having said this, it's only a matter of proving that this trade will actually work, which the rest of the speech eventually is about, making the contention clearer and easier for Gov to work with. So opposition's options are limited now. They have to either contest the principle in general, contest the directness of the principle, or adopt an entirely different principle altogether. So what do we have here? What did we learn from this video? A very simple concept that a lot of PM speakers can make use of is this. Cohesive principles are developed by showing that it is only this model that uniquely fulfills said principle. Don't just argue principles for the sake of arguing a principle, but argue so that you lead up to hyping up the necessity of this particular model alone above anything else in the debate. So it's the applicability of the model to the principle that becomes contested rather than the model not fitting in with the principle that you're arguing itself. Alright, that's it for today's video. Thanks for watching and I hope that you enjoyed this lesson.